I think we're live. There we go. Okay, I believe people can see and hear me. It's very surreal. I can't see others, so I'm going to have to trust the technology. Prynhawn da, croeso ar session heddiw. I'm Kieran Rees, I'm Director of Learner Experience, and this is one of our trailed deep dive sessions into some of our specific conditions. In the case of today's session, we're looking at our staff and learner welfare condition as well as our equality of opportunity condition. So over the next 45 minutes, we're going to give an overview of those conditions, what the intention behind them is, how we currently expect them to operate, as is set out in the consultation that's open at the moment. And then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions via our Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer them. And if we can't answer them, we'll take them away and we'll be happy to come back to you. We're also recording the session, so it will be up on our YouTube channel, and we can circulate the link to attendees once it's available. I should also say we were expected to be joined by Medr's lead working on the welfare condition, Ryan, but unfortunately at the last moment he's not been able to join us. So I'll be do my best to cover off that condition on Ryan's behalf, but if there are very specific detailed questions people would like to go into, I know Ryan would be very happy to pick up those conversations separately. So I think on that note, unless colleagues of Medr have anything else to flag, and I'm looking over at them expectantly. No, we're okay. We'll move straight into looking at the staff and learner welfare condition. So by way of background, as is the case with the majority of our conditions, this is set out fairly clearly in the Tertiary Education and Research Act, which is what created Medr, and it requires us to be satisfied to the effectiveness of providers' arrangements for supporting the welfare of learners and staff. So I think that's a requirement placed on us, and what we've tried to do through the creation of this condition is find a way for us to get assurance that, firstly, providers have an understanding of their risk areas when it comes to welfare, that they are taking reasonable steps to look at what they can do to address gaps, to respond and mitigate those risks. And we've tried to do that through a process I'm going to talk through in a moment. But first, if we have the next slide, Sam. In terms of definitions, because welfare can include a huge amount. Welsh Government, in the explanatory memorandum for the Act, set out their intention. They said our use of welfare in this context is intended to mean, and they talk about arrangements being policies, procedures, and services. They talk about well-being relating to emotional well-being and mental health, and they also talk about safety, which includes freedom from harassment, misconduct, violence, and hate crime. I think that's an important definition that kind of wraps around what we're trying to achieve with the condition. So the condition itself, if we go to the next slide, is built around, I'd say, two main vehicles. The first being the self-evaluation and the second being the action plan. Now, if we start with the self-evaluation, straight up front, we should say we know providers undertake all sorts of existing self-evaluation or self-assessment processes, and hopefully what comes across in the draft condition and guidance that we're consulting on is a recognition of that, and a clear intent that what we'd like to see, where appropriate, beneficial, is the self-evaluation requirements of this condition being wrapped into existing processes so that we're not recreating things or duplicating things. And there are certain expectations we have within the welfare self-evaluation. As I mentioned, it's about a consideration of the effectiveness of policies, procedures, and support services. It's also around undertaking a welfare risk assessment. I think what we're really keen to see there is providers just engaging in an active consideration of where their risks are. We also want the self-evaluation to be informed by the provider's quality impact assessment. Crucially, routinely, we're not expecting to see the self-evaluation. We're not asking for them to be submitted or approved. We just want to know, for providers to confirm that they are incorporating these questions relating to welfare into the self-evaluation that they are undertaking. That should feed into the sort of next pillar of the condition, really, which is well-timed change there, Sam, which is the annual welfare action plan. And I think I'll say straight away, we've got the word annual here. Something that's come through in our engagement yet is a question about whether it's annual or a longer cycle. And I think that's something we're really interested in engaging with providers and stakeholders to understand a bit more. So once providers have undertaken their self-evaluation and looked at where some of their risks are and what could be done to address those risks, what we want to see is that the provider is going through basically a priority setting exercise about what areas that they've identified in their self-evaluation are they going to address or look to mitigate. We would expect that action plan to be submitted to Medr, but again, it's not an approval process. It's submitted to demonstrate compliance with the condition. Crucially, we think the action plan needs to be owned and approved by the governing body as the responsible body for the provider. And in terms of a question that's come up quite a lot in our engagement, which is, what does this look like? Our current aim is to co-create the action plan with the sector. I think there's some important common principles across the self-evaluation and the action plan. For example, these do relate to learners and staff, and as such, we would expect learner and staff involvement in the development of the self-evaluation and the action plan document. Once we've received the action plan, I think then we move into the sort of the annual compliance cycle. If we go to the next slide. And some of the evidence that will inform Medr's assessment of compliance, and that it's essentially an assessment of compliance against all our conditions. And you'll notice these monitoring, what we've set out here in terms of ways in which we will monitor, are quite consistent across many of the conditions. But it will draw on evidence such as both provider self-reporting, crucially, in terms of what they share with us and what comes through in things like the annual assurance return, which, without going into too much detail in that element of our regulatory approach, will be something that providers are asked to submit on an annual basis, confirming that they are meeting certain requirements. Beyond that, we'll also look to draw in a range of other types of evidence to inform our compliance assessments, including information such as surveys, analysis of data, reportable events, inspections and reviews, and so on. I think crucially, and although this session is particularly focusing on the staff and learner welfare condition, I think crucially it's worth bearing in mind what's set out in our broader consultation in terms of the engagement approach. So firstly, across all of our regulatory system are the principles of proportionality and risk-based. So we want to make sure that the things we are doing take that proportional and risk-based approach. But linked to that is, if at any point there is a concern about possible non-compliance, in almost all cases, except in very unusual serious cases, we would expect the first step to always be a conversation with the provider to understand the context, what might be sitting behind it. And then, as I said on the consultation, there's some sort of laddered steps of follow-up or intervention beyond that. But I think, just to reiterate, the intention is always to take that risk-based and proportionate approach, working with providers and ensuring that anything we do is done with a full understanding of the position on the ground and what providers are grappling with or dealing with in the moment. So that'll be currently intended to be an annual cycle, so self-evaluation followed by submission of an action plan. And it is very much about, as required by the legislation, enabling us to be assured, to be satisfied, to use the language of the Act, about the effectiveness of provider arrangements. Happy to take any questions on this specific area before we move into a conversation on the equality of opportunity conditions. So if you have anything now, we can address them here, or alternatively, if you'd prefer to wait until the end, that's also fine, because there will be an opportunity after Sam's contribution on the equality of opportunity condition 2. I will give it a moment, but I can't see anything currently. Okay. In that case, save your questions for the end. I will do my best to follow up as and when. But I'm going to hand over to Sam, who's led our work on our equality of opportunity condition now.
Hi, thank you, Kieran. So my name is Sam and I'm the Widening Access and Transition Manager within Medr and the lead on the Equality of Opportunity condition. In terms of purpose and scope, I think Kieran has sort of laid out that a majority of what it is that's within our sort of conditions is actually set out in legislation, and I suppose helpfully in the space of equality of opportunity, it was actually quite specific in terms of the expectations, on Medr, in terms of promotion of equality of opportunity, and then providers in the space of delivering measurable outcomes. The equality of opportunity condition applies to HEI, so our higher education providers, further education, work-based learning and adult community learning. Noting that for the further education, work-based learning and adult community learning, it comes in from 26-27. HEs, you have the fee and access plan sort of phasing out in that time frame. However, what we're asking when we looked at how we can make a more collaborative approach to this, how we could sort of help the sector in terms of when certain conditions come in, we are asking providers to return measurable outcomes from 27-28. So it's a little bit after most of the conditions, and I think actually all of the other conditions that were in the pack. So it brings the sector kind of into line with the end of the fee and access plans and allows the sort of a bit more space, we hope, to providers to be able to be working together in this space rather than having different providers on different timelines. In terms of then the equality of opportunity legislation and what it sets out, we are calling it sort of the learner life cycle. We are asking providers to consider equality of opportunity and how to promote opportunities for underrepresented groups, from participation, which we have framed in the context of this condition as being that pre-access space and support through entry, then also looking at retention, so allowing learners to complete to the end of their course. Academic success, which is in that space of sort of reducing attainment or rewarding gaps for those that are underrepresented, and then in progression as well. So it's how learners have equitable support to be able to help them post-course then to either continue with education, get a job or start a business of their own. We are in this space also including the providers where they have learners who carry out research and innovation activities. We want that to include that providers look at measurable outcomes as it relates to increasing participation from those who are underrepresented in research, in the carrying out of research. We have had a fair bit of feedback in this space that this is quite a sort of well-serviced piece of work that our providers will be doing, which is great because you'll be able to use all of what you existing strategies and different plans and different ways of working to contribute to this. And we have had some questions as it relates then to where there might be some missing elements, for example, where maybe harassment is within the equality of opportunity. But as Kieran has just sort of laid out, that part sits and staff and learner welfare. So in the space of the Equalities Act, where you might expect to see some of it in the equality of opportunity condition, it is covered as part more of like a basket kind of approach to the different conditions. In terms of understanding barriers, we the Act does define that underrepresented learners in tertiary education are those that are disadvantaged as a result of social, cultural, economic or organisational factors. So we are asking providers to use that lens when it comes to conducting self-evaluation and considering what measurable outcomes that they will be setting themselves for delivery from 27-28. There is an intersection of the different barriers, for example, how economic and organisational barriers could intersect, and we do think that providers are best placed to understand their learners, their demographics and where they're positioned in their offer. So we do believe that you're in the best position to inform us as to what you should be working on in that space of measurable outcomes. We have asked, we've agreed, Medr has agreed to work in the spirit of the socio-economic duty, and providers are encouraged to do the same. We've also asked providers to give due regard to protected characteristics as defined under the Equality Act and align with their regulatory and Medr funded commitments as well. Where providers do have a duty to provide a strategic equality plan, obviously that is not all of the providers in the space that we are operating in, but we do know that a lot of the providers will have a strategic equality plan, and therefore as part of your annual review or looking at that, then you would use this additional lens to inform your work. In terms of then considerations, in a very similar way to lots of the other conditions and has how Kieran's just explained, staff and learner welfare will work, we do know that providers already engage in extensive self-evaluation. It might be through different toolkits, so we're aware in the ACL space that there is a partnership toolkit that can support self-evaluation. It might be that you're conducting this when you are looking at producing your annual equality reports and things like that. So ultimately, it's over to you when it's in your control how you conduct this process. We're not asking for a return of the self-evaluation or to be directive in that space. We are just asking that you sort of embed equality of opportunity through the lenses of this Act into those processes to draw down then on a series of measurable outcomes that you as a provider will then be working with to impact a positive impact for learners. Medr is working with QA and Estin and then with the sector to develop a set of self-evaluation principles. So in this space there will be some principles which will have cross-cutting themes, which will also help support with just wider self-evaluation in this space. The condition, we have asked providers to look for opportunities for collaboration with other providers and partners to address shared challenges, because we know that a lot of some of the challenges in the space of participation and progression are already being well supported through solid sort of collaborations, and where at all possible, improving and growing on those is strongly encouraged in this condition. The measurable outcomes, so we have had some feedback that there's already an extensive set of sort of targets or outcomes that providers may be setting as it relates to equality of opportunity. We're not 100% certain through the mapping that we've engaged with that would cover the expectations across the full piece, so whether or not it has the lenses fully of the social, cultural, economic and organisational barriers completely embedded, or that it looks at that complete life cycle picture. But we do know that there is a lot of work already in place, so therefore it's taking that and building those lenses on top. So instead of asking providers to maybe submit what they've already got in this space, we have asked for a template to be completed so that there is a submission of a document of your priorities as it relates, because there might be a large number of priorities in the space, but we want to draw out your kind of top ones that you're setting for measurable outcomes over a rolling 5-year basis. The 5 years, that's very much up for being informed through the consultation process. We don't think that too much can be miraculously solved within 5 years, but it gives a good grounding to start seeing some of the dials moving on some of the issues and barriers as it relates to equality of opportunity. But it's a sort of a maximum that you'd be looking at. So for 5 years initially, but again, you know, we will take feedback through the consultation if that's an appropriate length of time, and we would be looking then for that annual milestones in the piece then. So what you would expect after for each year. The unified template kind of helps us build a national picture. So it allows you then to draw down evidence for which ones that you're prioritising and how you will measure impact, and then what improvements you'd expect. But then it's also Medr's role in this space as a convener, and maybe in the space of doing some social research to see that national picture and see what we can do then in our role to help support it. For example, say that we have returns and it's quite obvious that a number of different providers are all working on a very similar measure as it relates to a certain group. That might be a space that we would be able to sort of help and get involved with them, or look at how we can inform through sort of effective practice, bring together maybe communities of practice and things like that. So it's not a how. We're not asking you to submit exactly how you're going to do it. We're asking for what it is you'll be working on and what impact you're expecting. It's not an action plan, it's a return of kind of your top priorities set over 5 years with that sort of annual milestone in, so that we can sort of continue to work with you, and it helps inform the monitoring. We do know that we'll have to take a proportionate response in this space, because it wouldn't be realistic for our adult community learning to be maybe setting the same number or the same level of measurable outcomes in this space as a larger FE or HE provider. But ultimately we didn't want to go down the route of sort of proposing a sort of a number picked from the sky of, you know, setting of 2, 3, 4 outcomes, because it has to be contextually relevant for what all of your pieces of work that you're drawing information from, such as if you have a strategic equality plan, annual returns, whatever it is that you're using to inform this piece, it's then most relevant to you and your provider. So in terms of the monitoring, in a very similar way, it will be dependent on you sort of submitting through an annual assurance return. The template is in the annex that goes with the supplementary detail on this condition. And then through that, you've seen this once before, because I think a number of the conditions will use very similar sort of ongoing evidence gathering methods, and it will be a sort of basket of these that it's used to inform. But most importantly, in the space of equality of opportunity, we can't sort of stress enough that this is quite, you know, tricky. We do know that a lot of the work in this space will take time, and we also know that it will require sort of a lot of communication and going back and forth and sort of finding out, well, what is working, what maybe can be done differently. We don't sort of expect that this will be sort of done in any other way other than a lot of ongoing conversation with providers. There was within the pack a note that sort of said that once these are sort of set for the 5 years and with the ongoing milestones, that if you wanted to make adjustments, which we would totally understand given the nature of some of the complexities in this area providers would need to make, that we would ask that you make adjustments that are agreed with us, not agreed by. This isn't sort of, you know, saying that we wouldn't accept changes to direction or measurable outcomes, but we would expect to have insight into the rationale and what more, if anything, there is a role and space for Medr to be doing to support if there is, for example, a need to change anything initially set. I think this begins the end. Yes, so we're on to the final part. We've not had any questions yet, but we are expecting and we are aware from how other presentations have gone that they'll drip in now. So I will take down this.
There are a couple of questions which relate into, I think, cycle and timeline in particular. There's a few things to unpack here, and I can see Mary and Tom, you've both asked similar points. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the broader cycle, which will then give context to some of the specifics in relation to the condition. These conditions come into effect August 2026. So effectively, we are operating on an academic year. The annual assurance return, which is, I think, a key regulatory tool across all of the conditions. It's something that's used sort of across the piece. For the academic year 26-27, the annual assurance return will be submitted winter 2027, so a few months after the end of the academic year. So the first annual return will be winter 2027. That will then be the annual cycle. So every year we would currently anticipate that's when the annual assurance return would be. I think that's one of the things we're testing within the consultation. Couple of other specific points, I think, in relation to welfare. One of the things we need to understand, and we're going to be going through a process of discussing this with providers and stakeholders in the coming weeks, is the point at which we need to ask for the action plan. And the reason this is slightly more nuanced is the welfare condition, unlike some of the other ones, is an initial condition. So certain thresholds have to be met relatively early on. So that's one of the things we're trying to bottom out, is the point at which we need to ask for the action plan. The other kind of side of the question, which Mary mentioned, is around the health and wellbeing funding application cycle. I presume you're talking about Medr's wellbeing funding. One of the things we really want to try to do is generally align what support we give through funds like that with the expectations of the regulatory system. And in particular, I think currently further on higher education providers who receive wellbeing funding, we do ask for a certain amount of reporting. I think some of the things we are looking to do is where can we ease up on that, confident that the broader aim of it is being addressed through some of our other requirements. But just to be clear, our ambition, aim, intention is to try and align our funding requirements and the cycle thereon with our expectations around the conditions requirements as well. So that is the ambition. Got another question for me from Claire. Medr hasn't imposed requirements on providers on staff welfare arrangements previously. Can you give some context on how this requirement has come about? It's in the legislation. So the Tertiary Education and Research Act requires that we be satisfied about the effectiveness of arrangements for staff and learner welfare within providers. So that is the requirement placed on Medr, and that's the intention of what this condition is intended to do. I think some important stuff, clarifications that I should have mentioned earlier. We are very clear in how we've set up the condition, and we are getting legal advice to make sure we've done this correctly. That this does not stray into areas of employment law, health and safety, other areas that are kind of reserved areas of law that we don't have competence in. The Act sets it out very clearly in terms of procedures, policies and support. That is within the jurisdiction of a provider's governing body, and governance of tertiary education providers is devolved to Wales. That's the basis on which it can be included in the Tertiary Act. That's the basis on which we can do it. So to be clear, our focus is very much on what is the provider doing around his consideration of policies and procedures, and the things it needs to do to respond to risk through its policies and procedures and support. That's the ambition. And actually then looking for possible positives, the benefits from this is, one, I think if we can develop a proactive consideration in this consistent across the tertiary sector, that in itself offers a benefit. But I think what we also hope is through the action plan process, if it can give us better information to inform our own policy development and judgments and decisions as well, I think there could be some value in that too. Do we have, is there anything on timeline? You spoke through your timeline, Sam, earlier, particularly in terms of the requirements around self-evaluation and measurable outcomes coming in 27, 28. I'm right to say, and your timeline then broadly matches along with the annual assurance cycle, doesn't it?
Yeah, it will fall in line for the year after. So obviously, because as Kieran explained, that the annual assurance is always kind of like looking for that assurance from the previous year, in 27, 28, in the same timeline as the annual assurance, we will be asking for your measurable outcomes, and then the monitoring of them then will fall into a place in the same cycle. So the submission of that template, if it is a template that we get general feedback is supported and is a suitable way forward on this, then it'll be a return of the template in that winter of 27, 28, and then it will fall in line with the rest of the annual assurance that you do in that space.
Great, we shall wait patiently on for if there are any further questions. I hope everyone's got access to the system. If there's any, there another one has just come through. Could you please explain how the definitions in the annex glossary of terms has been arrived at in relation to staff welfare and well-being and emotional well-being? So we are, with that question, getting into the territory of where I think my colleague Ryan, who's led this work, would be much better placed to answer, and unfortunately wasn't able to join us today, but I will do my best. So let me just get to the right area for the glossary of terms. To my best of my understanding, the definitions have been drawn from the explanatory memorandum for the Tertiary Education and Research Act, which is where the Welsh Government in the Act used terms around well-being, emotional well-being, welfare, and then in the explanatory memorandum they expanded on what their intentions were in that space, and I think that's what we've tried, and that's what we've taken up. So those definitions have been drawn from the Welsh Government's explanatory memorandum.
Yeah, and I think that in some of the spaces, sort of a little bit unhelpfully, there are multiple definitions, and depending on different pieces of work and different pieces of legislation that apply in Wales. So that is actually something that is being considered for the legal advice, and that is something that we're very interested as to whether or not where that's being pitched and on which definition is being drawn down on is appropriate. So there is a little bit of watch this space in that, and it might be that some of those definitions do change, but they're not our definitions. Every definition that you see within that space has been drawn down from an existing piece of legislation which applies in Wales.
And in terms of further guidance, I think what would be really useful for us through the consultation process is in the kind of supplementary detail and guidance that's currently published, if there are gaps, if there are things we can clarify further, do flag that up in the responses.
I think in terms of guidance, that in many of the conditions there's probably a space for underneath these sort of the condition and the detail that goes with condition long term for there to be more sort of space for advice and guidance, but that will be an evolving piece, because we were very clear that this is the start point to get this system up and running, and it will evolve over time.
Thanks, Sam. Reese has asked, when you outline that the well-being condition is an initial condition, does that mean the Medr may be expecting an action plan as early as September 2026 or earlier? I think that's something we need to work through in terms of the overall timeline. Whatever happens, we need to be proportionate around that for higher education providers who have to register between the periods of April and July 2026. We're very conscious there's going to be a lot of pressure on providers and things that they're going to have to achieve in that time. So whatever we set the hurdle as for that initial registration, we're going to need to make sure that we're taking a proportional approach. But I think the exact timings of when is something we're going to need to have further conversations with the sector and partners on. Sam, is there anything else to add on that point?
Yeah, I think that space of what is expected, that initial piece, we are working with our colleagues in regulation as to what can be pre-populated in this space in order for you to be able to access and be on the registers as quickly as possible, imagining that the action plan might actually be able to come later. So there is still a piece of work to be what is required initial for HEIs to get onto the registers, and then that action planning piece probably on a slightly later timeline. But that a little bit of that is in the space of the legality and the legal advice that we're also getting, but also what the registration kind of process is. So we hope to be able to come back to you as quickly as possible on that. But we understand that the action plan is being co-developed now over the winter and will be available at the same time as the registration process going live. So that's the current timeline. We do hope that you'll be able to see that co-produced action plan around that sort of April-ish time.
This is where I possibly get myself into a bit of trouble for freelancing, but depending on what the requirement, with the legal advice we get around the requirements around initial conditions, my ambition and hope would be that we can give providers plenty of time to go through that process of self-evaluation and action planning. And so I'd be keen for us to try and ensure we build that in as far as possible into the 26-27 academic year, but it is subject to given that it does have a more slightly privileged position as an initial condition in the Act, it does depend on the position we can get to in terms of legal advice.
Yes, we can't sort of make sort of promises in this space, but ultimately we want to sort of get to that point whereby the action plan is coming in on that winter 27 timeline, as Kieran explained, so that we're getting them all in at the same time as well. But we do just need to check in on that, and we will come back to you as soon as we're able.
And in terms of the consultation, any advice we can receive on what's most workable or practicable on that in particular would be welcome. It's a very strange format, this. I feel like I'm speaking into the void.
I've been called a lot of things, but that's a new one.
Okay. We don't seem to have any more questions, but I will just give it an extra moment. Our audience has been very resilient. We've only lost 3 people, I think, in 54 minutes, which is reassuring. Okay. As ever, our inboxes are open. If you have questions that occur to you, subsequently do get in touch. I think we will share our contact. I'm looking towards colleagues who organise this. I think we can share our contact details with those who attended, so you know who to get in touch with. There's also other events, both kind of ones intended, other deep dives on other parts of the conditions coming up in the following week, which are all on the Medr Eventbrite link where you registered for this. But as I said, if you have any specific things you want to explore further, do get in touch. This is fully intended to be a collaborative process, and one where hopefully what you see from the first phase consultation to this phase is how much has changed as a result of the feedback we had last time. And I think we're expecting to take similarly very much a listening approach, acting on whatever we can where appropriate again. And Heather has asked if this has been recorded, and I think I'm right in saying it is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. I don't think I'll be giving Mr. Beast a challenge for viewing numbers, but it will be available on YouTube. I think I've just revealed how old my children are by mentioning Mr. Beast, but there we are. Anything else? No. Great, brilliant. Oh, hold on. Will we receive a copy of the slides from today? Yes, we are. We are happy to. We are happy to. We can absolutely circulate the slides as well. That's no problem. I assume I look to colleagues Nick or David. I assume we have contact details to circulate the information from this event.
Yeah, that's right.
Great. Yes. Yeah. So that's great. Brilliant. Okay. Diolch all. Thank you. As I said, follow up as and when things occur to you, because I'm sure they will in the coming days or weeks. And hope to hear from all of you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.